Hello, my name is Miles, and I'm the host of Stop Stigma, Start Healing, a podcast where we address stigma in the LGBTQ community in our acquisition of healthcare. Today's topic is on meth and gay men. So actually, I thought before we officially get started, we could just sort of popcorn around or do some Freudian stuff around just gay code, words, images around meth. Just to familiarize ourselves with the vocabulary, get used to talking. So go for it. Jump in.
Snow.
Snow.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't see that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we use that for Coke.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, I've heard it for, in New York at least.
That's funny.
I don't know. Oh.
Yeah.
Works.
I mean, Tina, obviously, is the big gay word for meth.
Tina. Yeah. You said works.
Yeah, works.
Oh, like bring the works.
Yeah, bring the works.
Yeah.
Ooh, I've never heard that.
Clouds.
Yes.
Darts.
Oh, yeah.
Darts is one.
Yeah, that's
was
one
a
I've
good
never
one.
heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For injecting. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, points, of course.
Points.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Slamming.
Slamming. Ice cream cones.
Yes.
I didn't know that one either.
What is the tissue paper thing?
Oh, parachuting when you put meth
Mhm.
in toilet paper and then swallow it.
Oh.
And there's another way.
Boofing.
Boofing or booty bumps.
Booty
I've
bumps,
never
yeah.
heard this boofing before.
Yeah.
Boofing.
Boof? Right up your butt.
The booty bumps was. Whoa.
I wonder if there's like regional differences and
It probably is.
I think there is.
And meth differences. Like,
Oh,
we
sure.
think we're cute and come up with new names, you know.
Yeah.
All the time.
Crystal.
Tweaked out.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
Crystal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
London, they call it chemsex.
Oh, yes.
Here we
Yeah.
call
Yeah.
it. Here we call it party and play.
Party, yeah.
P&P.
There was one word that everyone used in New York was I'm her. They said they used that pronoun, her. Let me get some her.
Oh.
I know.
Mm.
Made it a little bit more appeasing.
What's it? Tween or teen? Like for the amount, like one
Oh,
and a
really?
half grams is like it's called a teen or something like that.
Oh.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard of that. Well, like teenager, I wouldn't hear
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Like teenager. Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Tweak.
Yeah.
Tweak, yeah.
Tweak. Yeah. Spun out.
Yeah.
Ice.
Yes.
Nice. Yeah.
Long sessions.
What else?
Okay. Did we kill that? Okay. Well, I'm going to start with this introduction here, and then we'll see how this goes. So, hi, my name is Miles. I'm your host of Stop Stigma, Start Healing, the raw and uncensored podcast where we talk openly and unapologetically about our lives as trans, lesbian, bi, gay, queer, and HIV positive humans. Our goal is to stop the stigma that prevents us from getting the health care we deserve. The format of each episode will feature real people in our community in conversation and storytelling. And our only disclaimer is the experiences shared here are valuable and important. They are based on the lives of those in this space and some of you who are listening. Prepare to be educated, shocked, seen, triggered, and informed. No matter your response, keep the conversation going. Start healing. So today our topic is meth and gay men. I have 4 awesome humans with me today in the studio, and I am going to let them each introduce themselves, share a little bit about yourself, kind of who you are, basic identity stuff.
Hey guys. I'll go first. My name is Alan. I'm 35 years old. An African American male, gay. Yeah, I mean, I'm an actor. I've been living here. I've been living in Columbus for 3 years. I lived in New York for 10. Just got back, and so yeah, right. Any more?
Great. No, that sounds
Okay.
good. Thank you, Alan.
My name's Chris. I am 49. I'm a white dude, about as white as you get. Let's see. I formerly, for decades, was in LGBT media, and now I work in recovery.
Great.
Hi, my name is Ralph, and I am from New York as well. I am 35 years old, and I'm a nurse at OSU.
Great, thank you. And
My name's Rob, and actually I'm from Southern California. 48 years old and Mexican descent, and I do hair. I've done hair for it'll be 19 years in December. It's kind of the basic of me.
good deal. So the reason why we're here today is to talk specifically about meth and gay men. Not a lot is out there about this topic. Some of us have conversations regularly about it in spaces that we have helped create over the last few years. What most people don't know, because I think people think that meth is a drug often used by white people, lower income. I think we have these images of what meth looks like, but not a lot of people know about how or why we use it in our community. And something important to note, meth use prevalence is 4 times higher in our community than it is in other communities. It impacts us with overdoses, brain and body issues. There's financial devastation, job loss, sexual dysfunction, family loss, incarceration, to name a few of the impacts. I think most people think the images that we have about not having teeth, living under the freeway are the ways that this drug impacts, but really impacts our community in a very different way. And we normalize it as part of what we call in our culture party and play. And it permeates our hookup apps and our club scenes. What we also know is that this drug was introduced into our community sometime in the late 80s, early 90s. As part of the party and play scene, there were lots of drugs used in our community. There is some speculation that they saw our community as a group of people that had a lot of disposable income. And we tie the use of meth to our sex and sexuality. And so we use meth to enhance those sexual experiences. We were a great target for that use, and we are here today because it is devastating our community. So with that, and anything else you want to share, so if you wouldn't mind, start talking about your own relationship with meth. What does that look like for you? How long? When did it start? Those sorts of things. And the mics are hot.
I can go. It's Chris. So I used to live in New York too. Late 90s. I moved there through early 2000s, and I was a big club guy. That was still when mega clubs were a thing. But I never knew meth besides being a gay drug. So I saw what it did. It was, we would be at the club all weekend and start, sometimes Friday, mostly Saturday through Sunday. And a lot of people just use meth to keep going, Back then, it never did anything for me. And I saw what it did to other people, and I didn't want to be like those spun out people, but I'm always an upper guy. But so when I moved to Columbus, that was like post all the clubs closing in New York, and I came here and I was like, why are people still doing this drug? Don't they know what it does? And I actually threw a forum on gay men and meth and the problems, because I worked in media, and it was prevalent where I worked. Everywhere else, I was like, what are you guys doing? And 10 years to the day, I figured out, was when I picked up meth to try to stay awake, to get some work done at work. And then that coupled with GHB and some good orgies, and off we went to the races. So, and then I got into recovery, I guess, 5 years ago. Yeah.
Great.
For me, yep, it started in New York for me. I was also, I wouldn't say a club kid, but I did do circuit parties.
Oh, yeah,
So circuit parties is where I found the harder drugs. And that was before crystal meth, because, you have the other drugs like GHB, you have Molly, you have all those drugs.
Ketamine.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what I was doing in the clubs. And then we would go, the after parties would have the crystal meth. And so that's when you will be up after the club, and then you'll go to the hotel suites or the hotel rooms, and you just party all night, orgies and everything of that nature. And that's where I found the ecstasy, and that's where I found like this whole new world that I didn't even know existed. And it was like, for me at that time, because my values and my things were shifted anyway, I loved it. I loved that world because I have been such a good boy all my life. So like seeing this was like, whoa, this happens. And so I was really attracted to that. But then 3 years ago, obviously 3.5 years ago, that's when I got into recovery. I came back here to Columbus because I was living in New York. And like my whole world had crashed down because I had started doing it intravenously. I had started, like I stopped paying my rent. I stopped working. Like it was just, my whole life was crumbling down. And so then I had to come back home to rebuild my foundation. And so 3.5 years ago is when I started to get sober. But yeah, I mean, that's what.
Great. Thanks, Alan.
And for me too, I guess we've all had spent time in New York City.
This is not, for those listening, this is not just a New York drug.
Right. Nor is it a prerequisite for your
Correct.
use. Yeah.
But it started in LA. The first time I actually did it, I was 19. So it's when I left the house. Because my parents were very religious, raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I decided that I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. And my parents told me that if I didn't want to do their version of conversion therapy, that I couldn't live there anymore. So I, in 20 minutes, packed what I could and left. And I went and stayed with a friend that had actually she had quit going to church then probably a month before that happened. Her mother had passed away unexpectedly. And we didn't see her at church anymore. So there were kind of speculation that she was using, they just said drugs. So I had called her and I went to her place. I didn't know where to go. And so she told me I could stay there for about a week till I found a place. And I walk in the door and she was cutting stuff up for herself. And she was just snorting it. But, and I told her what had happened and she just kind of said it makes everything go away. And I used it and I probably did a few lines. I remember being up for about 4 days and just at that moment, just kind of being like, this isn't me. And then it came back around probably when I was 25. And then this was a different experience. It's like when I was dating somebody and that was my first time experiencing my own birthday party because we didn't celebrate that as JWs. And so I didn't know how to put a birthday party together. So my friend said, "Oh, we'll do it for you. Just show up." And I was like, "Okay." So I showed up and it was just completely drug fueled. But at the time, it was fun, and I look back at a lot of that stuff. When I get asked sometimes, do you regret any of it? No, I had fun, but I learned the lesson and I learned to move on and to correct what was in between. And that's why I don't have regret about it. Anyway, so we're cleaning up and I thought it was a bottle of water that I chugged and it was GHB that a dealer had left.
Wow.
Oh no.
So I started to fall out. So the guy I was dating said, "You need to do some meth." And I didn't want to do it. And so he didn't force me, but he was very insistent. He's like, "You're going to fall asleep and it's going to be hard to wake you up." So I did it. And then we were up for 3 days and we kept doing it. And that's kind of when it got introduced to be pretty daily for about 2 years. And then my health started to really decline, and which is interesting because I think people that just don't understand addiction did the whole, "Well, you almost lost your life and it didn't turn you around." Like, no, that's why it's an addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I went to therapy and I kind of learned to get a better handle on it because I had to face the demon that caused me to go into addiction, which was the religion and leaving my family. So I cut them off verbally to their face, and things were looking good. And I realized that the problem now was that I dealt with the trigger, but now I just enjoyed using it. So to me, that's actually when it got harder to quit because that lasted for 20 years. There was a 20-year addiction that lasted, and the part that made it into such a game was that I had to still do what I was doing in my daily life as far as working out was a big thing for me. And because I didn't want to lose my size, so I knew that I couldn't party as much as I wanted to because people would start to know that I was on something. So it was really like this juggling act of hiding it. And I'll be 3 years sober in September 10th coming up. And I had this experience with a doctor that I've told many times, even very public about it. And I had to report him to the medical board for being too comfortable trying to be sexual with me all the time. And I walked out of the last appointment with him, and I didn't realize that it actually fucked with me more than I realized. And so my gym was always I'm very anti-religious. I actually don't like religion at all, but the gym was my temple from addiction. And I allowed those worlds to collide, and I actually was using in the bathroom before I would work which I couldn't believe I was doing that. And 4 days later was when I came downstairs. I knew the boys. I have 2 partners. I knew that they knew I was high, and I just came downstairs and said, I'm going to go to a outpatient treatment, and I'm going to start going to the meetings Tuesdays with Latina. And they were just like, okay. Because people ask, did somebody come up to you and say something? I said, no. I think that's what made sobriety different this time, was that I just, on my own, was like, I can't do this shit anymore. So
you're jumping to the end of the podcast. I don't want to give it all away right now, Rob. So we're trying to set the table for the devastation and destruction, and then you bring the hope.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
All right,
but
back to devastation.
Yeah, back to Ralph here.
Yeah. So my story is kind of a little different in that I feel like relative to everyone else, I'm fairly new to the culture surrounding meth and the LGBTQ community. I grew up in a very religious background community, and I was in the closet, not accepting my sexuality until college. So my only exposure really to drug culture with regards to the LGBTQ community was really queer as folk. That was it. And so kind of seeing that mixed in with sex and partying was like an escape from this very strict environment of masculine norms being preached upon a guy like me who was wasn't comfortable with it, and so I went away for college, and that felt like a way for me to express my freedom. And when I started to go onto the dating apps, the gay dating apps at the time, Grindr was just starting to come out and become more. Although I was like also on other like kind of internet like Real Jock and all those other ones.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. My profile's still there. I forgot the password. But yeah, that I started seeing how sexualized the apps were, and when I started hooking up, then people would be like, "Oh, you do P&P," and I was like, "What is that?" And so over time, each experience I had, I learned something new, and so that curiosity just feeds into your ambition to want to be part of a community that supports your sexuality. And that it comes with, as probably many of y'all will say, it comes with the territory almost, or at least it's communicated that way. Once I finished school and moved to Columbus to work at OSU, started learning more about how drugs affect the brain, and really found out that, okay, well, now I'm starting to develop this strong relationship with meth. It's now affecting my behavior in ways in which when I have an awful day, my lows are lows, and that then impresses upon me to then find a quick fix so I can get back onto a high. Even being in a stable, like, even keel isn't enough now. And it wasn't until, like, getting into a serious relationship that I started to see how much my concept of pleasure was so warped, whether it was sexual pleasure, whether it was just like social pleasure, intellectual, like my concentration just was gone, like at times. And that led to some issues in the relationship, because my mind would be elsewhere and my partner would know that, and that then led to, miscommunications and disagreements. And so I not only started to see the effects, but I started to feel the effects, and that then led me to kind of, like you said earlier, like, just make the choice, go out on a whim and take a concerted effort to journey on that road toward recovery.
We underestimate, I think, the chemical addiction. Clearly, like, it's a super powerful drug that hits the brain and the dopamines at a level that most drugs don't hit. And I think several of you touched on how it impacts our connections, our family, our partners. Wonder if you could share a little bit more about that, because I also kind of pepper in a little bit of that. What I think is different about how our community uses this drug is that there is often this extreme effort to cover it up and to continue with these lives that on the surface look super great, like I've got everything in control, but I've got this, like, I'm falling apart at night or on the weekends, and then rebounding on Monday, and the rebounds are harder and more difficult. If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about that and how you manage that with your partners, your family, your jobs, I think that might be helpful for people to hear about.
Well, oh good Lord. So anyway, like I said, with the family, that was pretty much the triggering part, and also I realized if I was going to head on the road of recovery, years ago when I was 25, that I was like, I had to cut them off. So,
but more importantly, your chosen family, so your partners.
Yeah. So I met them, Mike first, kind of learned to make my own family, and Mike and I have been together. It was 22 years on Monday, 21.
Congrats.
And he was very supportive, and he wasn't trying to be, but he watched me go through that a lot, and it still makes me emotional. But I have moments where I still, out of nowhere, just still apologize for no reason. Like, he never says it, he never throws it in my face. And I was going to, like, Lowe's with him like 2 weeks ago, and we were coming home, and I just said, you know what, I'm so sorry, just all that bullshit I caused with that. And he said, well, I forgave you. But I learned with therapy, that's accountability that's taken over. So it's okay to have those feelings still. So he, actually spoke at a recovery meeting, and we didn't rehearse anything. It was totally out of the blue. They were allowed to ask him whatever they wanted. No question was off topic or taboo. And I couldn't look at him the whole time. I didn't look at the floor, because he didn't say one demeaning thing about me, which was, he had every right to. He had every right to say, like, because I did some shitty things. And he just said nothing but like exalting things about me that I couldn't look at him. I embarrassed myself because of the behavior. But so, the mother of all questions people ask was, why did you stay with him? And that was a part that I was even just kind of like, oh shit. And he said, you know what, it would have been different if Rob was losing things, if we had things, cars repossessed, if we were being evicted. He said it would have been different if he was taking money from our accounts. He said, but I know he wasn't doing that. And he said, I know he was using his tip money to pay for things, which is true. And he said the person I fell in love with was the guy that wasn't on meth. And he's such a good man. He really is. And then Eric, he's been with us for 9 years, and he did see some of that for sure. But I think about that time, I was really trying to just gauge my behavior to not let what I was doing to Mike also happen to him. So I'm in a really good place right now with both of them, and I think I learned to love Mike all over again in a different way, because doing it sober versus doing it trying to battle meth is completely different subjects. And I think that kind of covers it.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think it's my mom cut me off. I didn't really talk to my dad that much, probably like once a month. But really what I've learned looking back on it all is that I could never build a coherent relationship that wasn't based off of sex. Everything that I did was for either for sex, for drugs, or to make money in order to get more drugs and do sex. And so all those 10 years in New York, that was every single goal of working, so then I could go out and drink, or I could go out and do some crystal meth and go have sex. It was all so I could not build a relationship. And that's what was so weird to me, because now going through recovery and building true platonic relationships has been such an adventure, although it's weird and crazy, but it's different. So like back in the day when I was trying to build these relationships, I didn't really want to talk to my mom. I didn't really want to talk to my dad. I just wanted to do my own thing out there and like forget about Columbus, forget about the family here, and try to build this family that I was building. I mean, because I'm not going to regret that. Because I did make friends. I mean, and we were all club kids and we were all circuit queens. But my whole goal, because I remember people saying, "Hey, but Alan, like, who are you? Like, what do you want?" But I was like, I just want to have sex. Can you stop talking? I mean, that was like, and that was how that was my mindset at that time. I could not build relationships at all.
So I don't have as close enough a relationship with my family to inform them of my use, and so there's this hidden part of my life that I'm struggling to navigate with in spaces where I'm afraid I will be judged, and that often happens with my family. Because of the religious upbringing, because I'm also the oldest in my family, there's this expectation that the oldest embodies the values, the culture of the family, and there was never a day gone by growing up where that wasn't emphasized to me. Like, if I did something well, it was like, okay, you're supposed to do that. But if I slipped, it was, well, you're not taking care of your siblings or your mom. Because I grew up in a single parent home, and throughout my life I've carried this pressure to be kind of strategic in how I navigate my life, and meth was always and has always been a way to release from that, to release from from having to always intellectualize things, or talk about the mysteries of life. Like, for me, it's just meth and sex. Like, that's what I'm here for. Don't change the subject. And that has always been a part of me that creates a fine line between time well spent and time well wasted. Is I will, in the moment I'm high and I'm snorting and smoking, there's this feeling like I don't have to worry about time or my life or getting older. But then when 2 days later I'm off that, and you're like, wow, 2 days have gone by and I have to be an adult now, and that really sucks. And as a nurse, I've worked with clients who struggle with other types of substance use addiction, and one of the things that I'm able to kind of glean from that is each substance has its own poison, has its own effect on people. Like smoking will kill you, like is a long drawn out process of killing, of ruining your life. Meth is like you lose your house in like 2 months after you could lose your house in like 2 months after you get hooked. And so my goal especially is to, and I think it's really interesting that we're doing this as a way to break down the stigma, is to get people to empathize and understand some of the contextual factors that bring us towards meth, and whether that's within the family structure, or being in a new environment, wanting to be your own person. It's easy for drugs to kind of slip in and through the back door and affect and impact those motivations. With my partner, the biggest motivation is one of the biggest motivations is to rejuvenate and renew the person that he fell in love with, because I can see even from like taking his perspective how things are when I'm coming off of a high, or I'm on a high, and when I'm sober and really making concerted efforts to repair that essential aspect of the relationship, which is my commitment, my intimacy, and the hardest part is knowing that struggle is there every time there's whether there's a setback or so. Yeah, it's really tough.
Thanks, Ralph.
I mean, I was very good at managing. I was a social user of drugs like my whole life, right? Well, I was a dare kid, and then once I found out that like pot wouldn't kill you on the first time you smoke it, that was like ingrained. Like the one video I still remember from those campaigns. And then it was like off to the races of curiosity, right? We talked about curiosity and drugs, and and I went through the gambit. And it's funny, different phases. Like, right, college was a lot of acid and pot, and then dabbled in cocaine, and then New York was all ecstasy and Special K at the club. But if you were going out to the bar, I'd have a 40 of coke and do bumps and drink. I mean, that was just normal, standard protocol. And then meth was around, GHB was kind of around, but during those late 90s is just when everything, those were like the bad drugs that people were doing. And I never got into opiates, and I never thought I'd be an IV user, right? And then, so, I had very successful business for most of my life, and things went south there, and I remember, and I picked up Just to Stay Awake, which I mentioned before, but it eventually, you were talking about how quick things happen. I mean, there was like my serious use was like 2 years of really just starting and then getting out of control until I got arrested. And I remember I used to have this checklist of things that I wouldn't do, you know, like, okay, if I start missing, my family is really close. It's a big family. And so like, if I miss my niece's swim meets, then I'll pull back, right? If my apartment starts looking like that guy that I hooked up with last night, like, I'll do that, you know? And I had this, and I kept watching myself check it off, but I kept adding things to the bottom. Like, oh, this isn't bad enough. This isn't bad enough, you know? And even when I knew it was bad enough, at some point I made a switch that, like, there was part of me that really liked the dark and dirty side of everything. Because, like Alan, I was, like, the good kid. That's how I was groomed. I was the responsible one. And when I hit a point in my life where I wasn't feeling like I was getting the help that I needed or deserved, even though I was asking for it, and I was having a lot of trauma response that I didn't understand that I was having from childhood shit, you know, I was just like, all right, I'm tired of being responsible. Fuck it, let's go, you know. And I was also, you know, and my family just kept thinking it was like the magazine. Like, you have to get out of this magazine, it's killing you. You're working too much, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's fine, but you're not giving me any solutions, right? It's all working the problem. That's all I wanted to do. And I didn't know how to fail because I was never taught how to fail properly, right? Like, it's the expectation. So my own ego and everything else, it was too much for me to let go of. And I always thought I could bring it back together, right? Like, I wasn't as bad as them. I'm not doing that. Like, I still had my condo. I might be behind on the mortgage, but, like, you know. And yeah, it wasn't until, you know, and I had overdoses too on GHB. I was in the hospital twice here. I've probably died almost 4 times on that. And that was never enough for me. Like, I always had an excuse, like, well, I picked up a bottle of Gatorade that I thought was Gatorade, and it was a mix that I already had, and chugged it and then fell out, you know? And, but that wasn't a problem. It was, I made a mistake, you know? And it was always like, oh, I just did that. Like,
but that's how it is. That's how it is in the community, though. It's like,
right.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, you just made a mistake. Just don't do it again.
Right. And I
sure
was
you
the
mark it
rules
clearly.
guy too, right? Like, if you're doing G or if you're doing this, like, know this, know that, you know, don't drink. You only do this much. We're not going to keep doing it. I don't want you to pass out because I want to have sex with you. So, like,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
that's because, like, Alan, it was really, sex was my #1 addiction. Meth, just when I finally got hooked up with it enough, that made that connection, it just fueled that more than anything else, right? And I always wanted love, I always wanted all that, but the sex I wanted more, and I had to convince myself there was a possibility that we could be married somehow, or it would work,
Right.
you know, until we got off, and then I was like, get out, like, you know, like, the lies I would tell myself in order to get those things, like, aren't rational, you know? So, like, if we're talking about it in terms of addiction, I was always a choice guy too. I had family members that were addicted to pain pills and everything else, and I knew where that line was. I knew when I crossed it, but I didn't understand. I might know that there was a threshold, but I didn't understand that I couldn't pull back from it ever. And I think until I got into it and understand that it's really a disease and not like this choice, even though I made a choice, you know, at some point that I knew, like, I might be doing too much and it'll change for me. I didn't understand that I could change it back. You know? And
it's interesting, if I can add, just listening to everybody talk about their experience, because we all seem to have our own way of, like, kind of manipulating people and basically manipulating ourselves to rationalize why we were doing it. And it seems to be all pretty sexual based too, because for me it was as well. I only had interest in sex. I didn't want to make friends with anybody that I hooked up with. I would try to hook up with like the seediest people. Hopefully they were attractive, but the seediest people, because I didn't want people to know that I was, messing with that. So to me, the fewer people that knew, the better off I was, that I could extend my use longer. But very interesting details hearing from you guys.
Yeah.
I also wanted to kind of highlight, because you touched upon it a little bit with trauma. I think as a black man, there's an awareness of the historical trauma around drug use, especially since the 80s, when crack cocaine was introduced, and to see, how that devastated many communities. I think there is a trauma response that around discussing drugs, discussing substance use, that can often make it hard to talk to loved ones about substance use issues, because they're of the way in which it has been, one, criminalized, but two, also demonized by people who have unfortunately been affected, whether that's directly through a death in the family, or through having a near-death experience themselves.
I mean, I would even switch it around though, and saying that most people, when I came back home, my family was like, I didn't know black people did crystal meth.
I remember
Right,
you telling me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And
You're
I'm like, yeah, because I mean, in most black communities, I would say, I mean, I don't want to make this, but I'm going to make this judgment because this is just what
this is your experience.
just most black people do weed, and then they like, or the crack cocaine epidemic as well. But I know about weed. That's what black people do. And so when I came home, they were like, crystal meth. That's what you said earlier. White people in trailer parks do, Alan. But in New York, it was just so different. It wasn't that. It was most of the nightlife for me. I mean, at least the group of people I was hanging around. But yeah.
Yeah, one of the first times I saw outreach efforts to address crystal meth was actually at Afropunk in New York, and it was really interesting to see just how in an environment that is predominantly celebrating African American culture and stuff, that there's an attempt to address the fact that not everything that happens outside of our community is impervious to affecting our community. And so that was really eye-opening for me.
It could be an entirely other podcast to even talk about the predatory nature of older white gay men on our young brown and black community members, because there's a lot out there about that very conversation that I think is important and valuable, especially when I see all of the brown and black people who come into some of the discussion spaces we have. And I think like you said, Alan, they come in with that sort of same family narrative that this isn't a drug that black people use.
Exactly.
Yeah. I heard a mention of lots of mention of some of the typical consequences and parallels to addiction to other substances, but also that this drug maybe goes to a deeper place. I think you used the word like a darkness. Did you use that, or am I making that up?
Oh yeah, the dark side of
the dark side.
I
That
mean,
was the dark side. Yeah.
Well, I would say just like that whole underground scene, right?
Yeah.
Like in general with using and I allegedly in Columbus was dealing, although I got arrested in West Virginia for dealing. So
You said allegedly. Okay, like the courts are here.
Hey, there's no statute of limitations on some things.
Okay.
Anyways, but for one, like the further I got into my addiction, the more people I realized were discarded by society, right? Like all these people, like that, and I had trauma that was locked away I didn't know, but somehow I recognized it in them, right? They had their families didn't treat them right. They were abused sexually or physically. They were rejected, and all they knew how to cover that up with was drugs. Was the first thing.
Right.
They never taught them how to handle anything, right? You're just supposed to get over it. Like be a man. Like if we're going to talk about that, or you know, for my family, it was always like you can pretty much do what you want if you stay within the rules and don't get caught, right? Like that was kind of like an underlining theme. So as long as I was functioning, it was fine. It was until like it was obvious, or like it might, you know, I got arrested down West Virginia, and that set me on a different path. But so there's that underbelly of all these people, and so I was like the addict that tried to save all the other addicts, like, and I kept in my somewhere I had it. If I can show them love, if I can save them, I can save myself, you know. And so I was pulling all these people into my boat, which is not the right thing to do. But then there was also part of that, like I really loved being on the other side. I had undercover cops in my building. I had a cop stationed in a taxi outside my thing, which we would fuck with continually, you know, like just playing those games. And I don't know about where you want to go with darkness.
Just that darkness that seems different than if you were someone who just had alcohol as a problem, or you were just someone who was addicted to coke. That the drug takes, it's a common theme I hear, that takes people to a really deeper, darker place.
Oh, yeah.
And it even pulls up I think trauma, like all this unresolved trauma that as gay boys we've never really resolved.
Right.
Around this.
I think for some people too, it kind of brings out behavior that you normally wouldn't do, like sexually, for sure.
Yeah.
I remember, I mean, many times in my experience, I think mind blowing how many people dealt with sexual trauma as children. And we would get high and they start telling me this stuff, and I'm just kind of like, oh my God, you're actually ruining the high right now.
Right.
But they're being serious and almost sometimes on the verge of like crying. And that was a sad part too. That's why I don't know where I got the wisdom at such an early age to just be like, don't be friends with these people no matter what you do. And I wouldn't. And many times we should exchange numbers. No, we shouldn't actually.
Yeah.
I had to do that to save myself, because I was already struggling, you know, to learn to stay sober, to stop, you know, Tina on some level, and I couldn't help anybody else. I just couldn't do it.
There was always like I found two factors of people. Like usually the people that were very sexually repressed would fall in love with Tina because they were open to it. Like before I got involved with Tina, I hated P&P, but I was very open sexually. Like, you want to talk about what we're going to do? Fine, we can do it. Like, just, you know. And then the other people that it would enhance that, but it would take them to real dark places. Like, the further I got into it, the more I realized I was trying to act out my trauma or reconcile my trauma in some kind of way, you know, towards the end. And, like, the stuff that I found appealing being high, I would never have found appealing before that, you know. But it changed, you know, once you start, it was like, then I only wanted P&P people. I didn't want anyone that wasn't on the same wavelength at all.
How has it changed, as much as you're comfortable, how has it changed your sex life on this side of meth?
Well, like I said earlier, I think just we all seem to kind of handle the sex part differently, it sounds like. On some levels it was the same, but I have to say, like, I could also enjoy sex sober all the time.
Okay.
I always had that mindset. I knew, like, when I was high and partying and it was always just sexual based, I knew that was never reality, so I was just going to enjoy it as much as I could, finish the whole bag if I could within 48 hours. Because I knew that experience sexually was not reality and it wasn't going to happen again for a long time. But I also at the same time knew that I could enjoy sober sex. And I still do. You know, I still do. But I know, like, with a lot of the meetings and hearing other people talk, like, it's like really a crazy struggle for people to learn to engage in, you know, like healthy sex again, even with their partner. Yeah, like I said, I could think it sounds like we all kind of just learn to handle things differently per person. But
I took a year and like a few months off of sex. I mean, I had to really find out what, I mean, I was just on that journey of like trying to find out what was going on, what happened. And then when I did get back into it, it still took some time because I was like, whoa, because I mean, the scene is really just, I mean, a lot of people like dark rooms, and like the dark room started to trigger me. And then I don't do poppers as well. So it's like people were offering me poppers and I was like, oh, I can't do it. But a lot of scenes when I walk into like, when I'm like hooking up or something like that, it's just like a lot of, it seems too reminiscent of the orgies, of the party and play, even though they're not doing it. It just seems very, very much like it. So I'm like, oh, let me take a step back. But I mean, now I guess it's a little easier. But I'm very particular now. Before it was like I would just do anything, but now it's like, okay, let's talk for a little bit and then see where that goes.
Yeah, I would say it's been a weird negotiation with myself to kind of get back into it, because before I was fine. Like I said, hook up, the quicker the better. Like it was, you know, more of like a, let me get this static out of my body so I can focus on what I was doing. And the easiest way to do that was like sex, and to lie to myself because, you know, like, oh yeah, I am somehow getting enough of a relationship out of this 5 to 30 minute experience that fulfilled whatever that well is, you know. And now being in recovery, as long as I have, and not that I haven't hooked up, but I don't think I was trying to figure out if I've had sex in 2 years with somebody. And that's been more like, I really want a relationship, or I think I do, right? And so I want to do things different. And because a lot of that sexual behavior is very much reminiscent of my using behavior and how those dovetailed, I have to really like think, why am I doing it? What am I trying to get out of it? Is it like I'm naturally horny, or am I disturbed and covering up shit again, like I did drugs or men or whatever else? Like, am I acting in my disease, or am I acting out of like a natural connection? But since I didn't have a lot of natural connections,
It's all brand
like,
new.
right?
Yeah.
And so like I can have a date with someone and think, you know, I'm horny at the time, and by the end of the day I'm like, oh, no, that's not what I wanted at all. Like
Yeah, I think for me, I'm starting to like learn how to put pieces of the puzzle of sexual pleasure back together. Like for my partner and I, like there hasn't been a huge effect of meth on our sex life, though sometimes I will struggle with performance anxiety. I feel like my performance anxiety has gone up tremendously, and that can sometimes affect like whether I can get it up or sustain it. And I think in the process of going to counseling, and what's been great about our counselor has been is that everything's an open book. And so we've talked to our counselor about like how to explore sexual pleasure, because before we were doing pretty much what people say vanilla, and so in the process of exploring, there's a, you know, part of my brain that's being unlocked by all these new things that I'm figuring out that I like, and that has helped to some degree buffer what I think are some of the effects of the effects of meth on sex, on sexual behavior and sexual pleasure. But yeah, I think, I mean, is having sex while on meth better? Yes. But you know, is it worth it? It's not worth. Yeah, it's not worth it. And I think it's ironic that, like, you know, when you take a hit and you exhale, it's a fog, and it's really it's a fog of it's a fog that's of what you think sex should be like, but it's not really the case.
But I would say that with the is it better situation, because I'm like, well, I mean, the first time was amazing.
Yeah.
The first time was everything. But then I kept trying to chase that first time. And then I couldn't come, or can I say that on here?
You can, This is not NPR.
And then I couldn't come like half of the time otherwise. Or I'll be
get it up
2 days, trying to come. And then it's like, what? So that trying to chase after that first time is one of the most aggravating things I had ever experienced, looking back on everything. But even now, to the day, I can still tell when I have a problem, because when I get on Grindr, or when I get on Sniffies, or what is that other
Christian Mingle?
How do you not go on Christian
Harmony.
Mingle? Oh my God. It's the other one. Scruff. Thank you. Yes.
Growler.
Or Jack.
Hornet.
It's like, and I'm stuck on it, and I'm there all day, and I can't get off. It makes me think about how I used to be when I was on crystal meth, because I can't get off of it. Like, it's just, I'm just stuck and glued to the screen. Like, how many men can I talk to? What can I do? And then it's only when I'm putting my mindset like, well, okay, why am I doing this? What's going on here? Let me talk to somebody naturally. That's when it all changes. But to your point, it was just like, I'm always chasing that first time.
Sure. Diminishing returns. And you both brought up something as we sort of lead in closer to the end of our discussion today. Although it finally got heated up. This is what I know about you all. You all are so great in talking about this stuff, and I appreciate that. But now, of course, I'm going to take us closer to the end, because we are here to talk about stigma in the healthcare community. And as a member of the healthcare provider community, I will say I hope that I'm a loud voice at the table to say we like to put a lot of blame on people who use meth and say the failure rate is really high. But the reality is, our healthcare practices and protocols and procedures have not kept up with the needs of people who have a relationship with healthcare. So we have in fact failed people who use this drug, instead of you have failed treatment because the treatment is not effective. We toss out things to people who use meth that we use to treat other addictions, and they're not effective. And we just haven't come up with a better option. I'm hopeful we don't have that yet. How has meth impacted your relationship with healthcare in terms of even being open and honest with your healthcare providers, whether it's your counselor, your doctor, your dentist, or whoever? And what sort of feedback, or what would you like to ask from a healthcare provider? It's sort of the magic wand question. Like, what would be really helpful for you moving forward? Two-parter.
I mean, I think for me, I didn't tell my healthcare provider anything. I mean, not until I got in recovery. I mean, I was ashamed. I felt guilty. First of all, I felt like I wasn't gonna get arrested and go to jail or do something. I mean, but it's just not something that we talk about. It's just not something that should be discussed. I mean, obviously they ask you about drinks, if you do any drugs or something in those questionnaires or whatever they do. But I don't trust saying that. Maybe in a therapeutic environment, maybe in an environment where that's where that was geared for, then I would have. But I don't know. I guess judging from TV, judging from things I've seen and heard or read in the newspaper or anything about drug bust or anything of that nature, I just would never come to my doctor and be like, hey, I have a problem with crystal meth. I had to tell my dad or my family first, and then they hooked me up, and then I went to treatment. But but then the other question was, what would I want to ask them?
Yeah, if you had a magic wand, like, what would you change about the healthcare world?
That there's more places to just come for help, to be around, to be there for people where they just can come and be like, hey, I have a problem. Like, I love that's what Tuesdays Without Tina's are like. It's just like you come, even if you are using, if you are not, you're coming to have a supportive community so that they can just talk to you and you can talk to them. And then maybe, hopefully in those conversations, hopefully in whatever you do there, something is birthed or a seed is planted. So then that will start making people get up and into action to stop.
And you want to go?
Oh, good.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like when I was in New York, I had a distrust for health care too, because back in New York, and this was still when we were past the AIDS epidemic, but we were still in AIDS crisis mode, right? And we would have to go anonymously to the healthcare or whatever the city health clinic was, wait 2 weeks, which was torturous, do the blood test, wait 2 weeks, get reprimanded while you were getting your test done,
Shamed.
Yeah. And then just that 2 weeks of shame and guilt, so if I didn't really think I had a problem with drugs, I'm not going to bring that up to my personal healthcare provider. One, I always want to look better than I am, right? Like I always want to please someone of authority. That's a thing I have, or get praised. So like when it was finally time to go to treatment, it wasn't, although, I mean, I was going to Equitas, and at that point I was also doing like SharePoint or SafePoint, so the cat was kind of out of the bag, like there, and in the community it wasn't that. So I could share with my nurse practitioner there about what was going on and just be like, no, I'm not ready for that. No. But when it was finally time to go, I knew I had to go somewhere away from Columbus for me, because there was no way I didn't know about any treatment really around here, but I also knew myself, like, if I'm in the city, I'm just going to go out and use. Like, there's no way. And for some reason, I knew I needed trauma-informed care, because something was wrong. And I always knew something was wrong. And luckily, we found that down in Tennessee for me. But now that I'm in the field and I realize how many great programs are around here, it's different. But I would say, especially for primary care, my wish list is like, get educated, and if you don't like addicts, don't service them, or just make a nice referral to someone else. Like, don't try to posture, and don't try to do that, and get out there and do some work in the actual community to see what's going on, or try to learn better about what's going on and not what you think. Because I know when I ended up in the ER several times, the nurses were talking shit about me, asking me questions. Well, I had a tube down my throat, and then I tried talking. They're like, don't talk. And I was like, you just asked me a fucking question. And now you're talking shit about me. Like,
Emergency rooms are notorious for dismissing people who use meth. Notoriously.
Yeah.
They can't see the hurt beyond, oh, well, he used meth. Yeah.
Well, and these were GHB overdoses, so it didn't even show up on stuff. They'd be like, well, what'd you use? It's not showing up.
Yeah, well, that's your fault.
You don't know what it is, then you're not going to be able to help me, regardless. Like, you don't even know what it is. So, like, rip, I'm out.
I think it's interesting, as a nurse, addiction medicine is very new. Like, it is probably within less than 10 years old. So
Really?
if you think about like many of the nurses who are serving you at emergency rooms, clinics, and such, they went through nursing school with next to nothing when it came to understanding addiction. So a lot of times it's coming through their biases, whether it's, like you said, coming through the news about drug busts and such. But what's so interesting about addiction that I think people really need to understand, and as a nurse, one of the best ways that we can serve our clients is through the way we convey our empathy, and the way in which we can sit with them in their situation, good or bad. The addiction, drugs not only affect the way in which we seek pleasure, but also it actually blocks and blunts the areas of our brain that are important for rational decision making, for calculating gains and losses. So when that part of the brain is impaired, it's next to impossible to override the cravings and such. So it requires retraining the brain to understand how to make those calculations. And one of the things we learned is that it even if you forget something, it's never really gone. It's easy to get back onto, or it's possible to get back onto the pattern of learning how to make those decisions, but it's going to take an environment. And I think if I was to say wave my hand and do bibbidi boppity boo to the healthcare system, I would say we need to create cultures that empower and instill hope of recovery. That's really, and whether that's, and that can't just be just through one, like a peer support network. If we had peer support networks, like a group of people who are peer supporters for each other or for one person, then we would save so much, not just economically, but in terms of pain, trauma. We would be able to override many of these effects, I think.
Great. Rob, you want to take us home?
I was going to say, telling doctors that you are using is not comfortable ever. But I remember, though, when I first was diagnosed with HIV, and so I was going to it's called Jeffrey Goodman Clinic in Hollywood at the time. It still exists under a different name, though. And actually, I remember the doctor I was seeing there, Julia Ireland, like, she's a magical woman because she really, like, taught me to not be afraid of it. And she would ask quite often, actually, she's like, are you using meth? And I would get quiet, and she says, well, the reason I'm asking is just because your numbers are low. So she said, she would explain the whole thing. So when you're using, it's breaking down your immune system. So your, your viral load is going to get higher. And so I was actually comfortable telling her that. And she would offer, she's like, there's a counselor here if you need to talk to. And I would decline it, but she would at least offer it. But I noticed once I left there and went to like doctors here, it was never comfortable because, first of all, I knew that they weren't going to probably prescribe me the controlled substances anymore, like Ambien. I knew that would get cut off. So, but I have to say, if there was one thing to wish, I wish that when they would ask you, how many drinks do you drink? Just one. And what's the term they use? Illegal drug activity? I don't remember what they ask you exactly in there.
Street drugs.
I wish they would ask you instead of just saying that. Like, the reason I'm asking you too is because if you need some counseling or help, we can provide that as well. I wish they would actually include that with there, and I bet more people would probably be comfortable bringing it up.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Instead of just saying, do you use illegal drugs, say...
Because it seems like they're going to grill you.
Yeah, say, hey, it might be important for us to know what you're taking because it could impact what I prescribe, and drug, there could be a drug interaction. Yeah. That's why I want to know versus I just want to check a box that says, Miles uses illegal drugs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then, like, if you're talking about opioids and people that are, you mark down that you had an opioid disorder and maybe you've been in recovery 5 years and you're in pain, you're flagged, right? Yeah. You're immediately flagged on your chart, and you can't convince them otherwise that, like, no matter what your recovery time is, that you're not just drug seeking. Like, that mentality is so pervasive still. But yeah, a different way to normalize those questions in a positive, affirming way would be fantastic.
Any final words? Anything else you want to say while we have mics in front of your face? Since I dragged you all the way out here, asked you to speak about really difficult stuff with lots of shame and politics wrapped around it. Anything else you would like to share with the listeners out there?
I think, to me, I was telling Miles, I actually canceled my day of appointments, and I told everybody, it's like, I really need to do this and talk about it, because somebody asked me today, like, were they okay with it? I was like, well, they didn't have a choice. I said, I'm going to do it. I just need you to understand. They're like, no, that's fine. So to me, I think it's really about the importance of learning to break down the stigma, that you can't do it unless you're comfortable actually being very vocal about it. And unfortunately, the people that I don't fear, but the people that, you know, others may fear to disclose the information, they will have to learn to be uncomfortable listening to you go through what you've gone with to be able to be supportive, is kind of what I've learned. So
Great.
I think there is hope. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Even if you don't want to quit, there is still, don't give up on people. Don't give up on life. Keep going no matter what. But there is always someone out there, no matter what, that loves you, that cares about you. Don't let your thoughts get the best of you.
Yeah, and I would say to that end, even if you don't think there are people that love and care for you now, there's communities out there that will. So if you want to find recovery or whatever your pathway is, you know, if you want to keep using for the rest of your life, that's fine too. There's supportive people out there. It's if it's causing you problems, then there's plenty of different communities on pathways to recovery that will help you along that journey.
Great.
Yeah. I think on that note as well, find your tribe and what makes you feel fulfilled, and if meth is not doing that for you, but you're using, know that there are people who can help you find a better alternative. Yeah, and this is a I think we've talked about it, partly a social problem, and it requires a social solution.
Very good. Well, with that, I want to thank you all for taking your time today and sharing your stories of hope and of realism in terms of what the world is really like. I actually want to invite you to come back and do 9 more episodes with me. So let me know what your schedule is like. And for those listening, you can find us at stopstigmastarthealing.com on the internets. And so look us up. There's some good stuff on there about support options, treatment options, and just places where you can connect with folks in a variety of different ways. So we look forward to having you back at our next episode. And with that, I will hand it over to our production manager, Rizzo.